Brothers, sisters, this is a video about why certain things are taboo. If you can name in the comment section below what I just did as far as why it is taboo and the different elements that were comprised in these first few seconds of the video, then I will answer any question that you have in a YouTube video. If this is on YouTube and you put the comment down there, it's far more likely. If this is on Facebook, I will try to allow it to transfer to YouTube and make a video on it regarding your comment, naming it, and basically why you were the winner. Now, there are many things that are considered taboo because there are so many cultures among humanity. There are many ways we practice civilization. Now, certain practices or certain rituals or activities become taboo because we have this natural tribal instinct, this natural animal instinct as human beings to basically practice our civilization in a common way, no matter what civilization you are in. And it started out with tribes and clans and then, cities and then states, city-states. But there was always this idea that if we all act the same way, then we are stronger against all those without our walls who act in different ways. And it's as simple as that. If somebody's acting in a way that is not conducive to your society, then there's this natural instinct to have a negative response psychologically to that person. And in the modern age, in this information age, luckily this has been stymied quite a bit because we have access to so many different kinds of ways of living, of being human, of practicing civilization. And luckily, since we're exposed to all this, at least everybody in the first world countries, we are far more open to other ideas of being human. Now, I'm going to discuss a few of the things besides what I just used and besides the techniques that I would like you to name in response to how I began this video. Besides those things, I would like to name some things that are taboo, depending on what society you're in and why. Now, keeping snakeskin, for instance, and then these things are all mine, by the way, so there's a lot of that taboo going on within my own life. But keeping snakeskin, it doesn't seem like something that people in our society, and I'm using American society as an example, that very many people in our society would keep. It really feels like magic. It really feels like there must be some negative purpose to keeping snakeskin. I'm not talking about boots or gloves or making things out of snakeskin, but literally just the shedded skin. Because there's this superstitious aspect to our society that thinks that if you have snakeskin, obviously you're going to cast some kind of curse or something like that. If you haven't been exposed to this superstition, then consider yourself lucky, because that is very old American superstition. Well, not just American, but around the world. Because there are things that you can do with snakeskin in the realm of magic, but not all of it, and not even the majority of it, is negative. It's just viewed with some kind of contentment. Now, let's go to another thing. Now, depending on what religion you are, this book will bring out some negative feelings in you, the Quran. And now, I want to name what is actually kind of taboo from the publisher's point of view. No publishing company that is associated with a Muslim group or one that is really wanting to keep the Quran in its truest state would spell Quran with a K on any of their books, and it's spelled with a K on this book. So there's already kind of a little bit of a barrier as far as taboo goes between the publisher and publishing the book, the Quran. Now, I study all kinds of spiritual books, spiritual traditions, so the Quran is not something that would be in my library and immediately mean that I'm Muslim. I have many things in my library. But depending on what religion you are, you might have a bad response to this. It may be taboo for you in your society, in your culture, in the United States, if those around you have a negative idea of Muslims, a negative idea of what Muslims are, how they practice their way of life, and what you can expect from them. Because a lot of the time, when we don't have a certain kind of people around us very much, and we only hear about, like suicide bombings or terror attacks or rapes, then it's hard for us to understand what it is to be Muslim without associating with these terrible stories that we hear, because we don't hear about Muslims outside of these terrible stories. So let's move on. there's some minor taboos here that I'm going to discuss as well. Wearing fighting gloves. Now these are weightlifting gloves, but let's imagine that they're fighting gloves. If you have two of these on, obviously you're either making a fashion statement that isn't usual to our society, or you're planning to fight. This is what a lot of cops will see if you're wearing gloves like this. And that's a minor thing. It's not illegal, and a lot of taboos are not illegal per se, but in society, people might give you a second glance, and they might assume quite a bit about you, depending on what taboo you're breaking. And I put it in parentheses because there are many different taboos throughout the world, and they're not going to remain consistent for every single society. So there are taboos in relation to laws. And I wouldn't even necessarily consider most laws taboo, but I would consider some of them taboo. And it's worth mentioning that if you carry around brass knuckles, which these are more of a chrome knuckles, but if you carry these around, then you're breaking a law. If you carry them on your body, if you just own them, then you're not. But if you're carrying them around, then you're breaking a law. So there's certain expectations that the law has of you, and this is the reason laws like this are put into place, because if you're carrying these around, obviously you want to hurt somebody. They're not for a good luck charm. They're not for a collectible. If you're carrying these around, you want to hurt somebody, so a law is made. Now, you might not consider that a taboo, but I would consider it as a lead up to a law is kind of a taboo. Now, let's go over to some of the other items. Skulls. Now, I have a skull shirt on, and I have a voodoo background behind me. And there's a lot of things associated with skulls as far as being corrupting. Obviously, death and the devil are the same thing. Obviously, those who do not follow Jesus Christ are those who seek death, who follow death, who worship death and the devil. And I'm just giving one example. And bringing up death in society is not a popular thing because we don't like to really look at our own mortality. This is more of a taboo that is really human, because worldwide, because we don't like to think of our own mortality. We like to avoid it as much as possible, and we don't like to be reminded of the idea that we're going to die, at least for the vast majority of the human race. And it scares us, and we think that it's bad because we don't want to die, so obviously death is evil. But that's not necessarily the case. Death isn't necessarily corruption. I mean, without death, the natural cycle of life could not exist. Without death, life would have no value. And this world would have been overcrowded. I mean, there's so many things that it would change if we didn't have death, but one of the things is this world would be overcrowded many thousands of years ago, and all the resources would have been used up. But death is a vital part of life, is my main point. But we don't like to be reminded of mortality. That's why we kind of look down upon skulls, whether they be on T-shirts, whether they be on items you might put in your house. And usually you're considered kind of weird if you have a lot of skulls that you're wearing or that you have in your house. Now, depending on what society you live in, condoms might be looked down upon. They might be seen as if it's a very religious society that you live in, then contraception and condoms, any kind of way of preventing birth control, might obviously mean to very religious people that you are a deviant, somebody who just wants to have sex for fun and not for reproduction. And that makes you immediately a deviant to some very religious people. So depending on what society you're in, possessing condoms can be a taboo for sure, and sometimes it can get you in a lot of trouble with the law if it's a very religious country. Now, back to, I practice voodoo, but let's go to voodoo. And this is a fake voodoo doll. No voodoo doll actually looks like this. No voodoo doll is something you can order and buy in a package made in China. No voodoo doll, well, very few voodoo dolls are made in China, very, very few. Because a lot of the time, the person using them has to make them. And they have to connect that spell to their own magic. And they have to connect that spell to the other person, and they have to make it very, very connected to the person they're making it to an influence. But I've never used a voodoo doll in real life. I know how to use them. And it's not always... The vast majority of the time a voodoo doll is made, It's not for cursing. It's not for hurting people. It's not for torturing the doll and having that have an impact on that person, either spiritually or physically. Most of the time, voodoo dolls are made and worked with magically because they want to help the person. The practitioner wants to help the person that they made a voodoo doll for. They want to increase their health, increase their strength, so that if they're on death's door or if they're suffering from a disease or illness, they can be revived. The vast majority of voodoo or Santeria or Osha practitioners, just in that general area, I don't like to lump a whole different kinds of magic together, but the vast majority of all these practitioners, magical practitioners, do not have evil motives in mind. They seek protection. They seek to help themselves and their family, either through health or money, and they seek a grander connection to that which is beyond this world. But the vast majority are not bokors. It's a word. It's a voodoo word for basically a dark magician, a dark voodoo magician. Bokors are very few compared to the amount of magical practitioners in voodoo or the like-minded traditions that are generally out there. Now, let's move on to something else. A bumper sticker like this might actually be taboo, depending on what culture you're around, depending on what community you're in, rather. If you have this sticker on your car, you might be considered a hippie by some really small town cops. Maybe obviously you're smoking weed, or you're a dirty liberal, and you're doing something wrong, so you're more likely to be pulled over. In some towns, in Texas, for instance, but not all small towns, not even the majority of small towns, but there are some small towns that will not like the idea that we can coexist, and it'll just bring out a negative reaction because of that person's bias. Going a little bit more quickly here, painting in blood. This is pretty old, but painting in blood, my own blood, for instance, is very looked down upon. And it's funny that I held it upside down, but it's very frowned upon. Any dealing with your own blood and using it for artistic or spiritual purposes is usually seen as a negative spiritual thing, but there are many ways you can use your blood, I have, for positive spiritual things. I try to make myself stronger and myself more connected to that which is beyond. I've never used my own blood in order to harm somebody else. That's just, it's a myth most of the time that all blood magic is evil. It is a very dangerous magic, so I wouldn't recommend it, but it's not all evil. Now, a handbook of rune magic. Once again, magic, runes, usually associated with pagans, heathens, and the idea that spells can be cast through using the magical alphabet of the runes, in this case, the Elder Futhark, is ingrained in Christianity and, other religions as well, but mainly Christianity because of the conversion of almost all European nations to the majority being Christian. The idea of runes is very much associated with heathens and people who are not destined for salvation but destined for hell. And magic and runes in general are looked upon in many Christian societies as being heathen and hellish. Now, this is a grimoire. This is the Grimoire Verum. And this is actually a grimoire that teaches you how to deal with demons. But you have to understand that a lot of people who have these books in their library, in their spiritual library, have no desire to necessarily contact demons or use them, but to examine their enemy. Learn how to guard against demons. And even a lot of people who deal with demons either don't know that there's a big danger involved, or have some selfish motivations. But just because you have a grimoire that, and this is considered taboo in the vast majority of cultures in the world, just because you have a grimoire that teaches you how to deal with demons doesn't mean that you want to hurt everybody around you, or that you are an inherently evil person. It means that you want to, you have some selfish desires a lot of the time, or you are researching your enemy. And selfish desires in and of themselves don't make you evil, and capitalism is proof of that. Now, to wrap this up, there are many things that are considered taboo throughout the world, throughout the human race, and there's only one human race. There's many cultures, many different peoples, but there's only one human race, and there are many different spiritual traditions or lack thereof. But a lot of the time, things that are taboo are not correctly gazed upon. Most taboos are just completely societally based and do not involve harming other people or harming yourself to a great degree. It's just that it is uncommon or bizarre in that society, so people in that society will view your practices as being taboo. We have to reanalyze how we view the rest of the world and how we view our own traditions and customs, and how we can really have a dialogue with other religions, other traditions, other customs around the world, so that we can become a united human race who does not just fight itself just because we have these certain taboos. And these taboos, they can start small, like propaganda about Africans and voodoo, a couple hundred years ago, and Christian missionaries and European settlers and colonizers really thinking Africans were evil and Native Americans were evil because they practiced things like this. And they did some terrible things. Just based on a superstition, they tortured, they enslaved, they killed. Just starting out with a superstition, a taboo. And, a lot of the time with a taboo, it's like the chicken or the egg argument, which came first. The taboo or the hatred of a people, therefore propagating or making a taboo. But regardless, we don't want things like this to continue. We don't want a lack of information, a lack of knowledge between peoples to persist. We have to learn from our past. And the taboos that we have found in our past and the reaction to them should show that we need to be more open-minded and always seek a compassionate solution to an seeming incompatibility between cultures. And thus, our taboos must be re-examined themselves. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, if you name a few of the taboos that I started this video with and explain why they're taboos, the winner, I guess you could say, in the comment section below on YouTube mainly, but also on Facebook. I'll look at those. I will tell them that they're the winner, and I will answer any question that they have in a video in the future, in the near future. If not the next video, then the one after that. But feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. And if you have any comments as far as taboos that are good, and there are some taboos that are good, like sex with children. That's a terrible taboo that all of humanity should just keep in their hearts and never have sex with children. That's terrible. Some taboos are just, but the vast majority are not. And if you have any comments regarding taboos that you like or dislike, put it down in the comment section below. If you want to subscribe, I really appreciate it. Hit that like button if you thought any of this was interesting. But at any rate, thank you very much for watching, and I hope all of you have a great day.